Hello, I'm Una. You're very welcome to my channel. This is the second video in a series where I'm looking at a stamp and die set from Waffle Flower that was originally intended for swatching your ink pads, but I'm using it to create geometric patterns on the front of cards. That tiny little square stamp is the one I've used in this video, and I'll link to the previous one in the top corner. Now this is how I prepare my panel. If I don't have a die that will cut out the panel the shape I want, I use my MISTI tool and a MISTI corner to draw the shape, and then I cut it out and trim it down on my guillotine. This is a very good way to prepare 4-inch square panels for the wreath builder as well. Now I'm placing this panel at 1¼ inch and 5¼ inch on the bottom of the MISTI. And this is going to ensure that I stay straight, and I used a little tile there. You could just look through the stamp, but I liked physically having a stamp to place to get my placement absolutely right. So I placed the stamp over the template stamp, and I'm off. Once I've got that first one in position, now I'm ready to get started. Now I just noticed that the 4-inch panel is slightly taller than a grid line on the MISTI, and I want to use the MISTI lines. So I decided to ignore the fact that it was going to leave me with a gap that was slightly narrower between the first two tiles. And I'm just putting the first two tiles right there because it was a hair out, and I decided to redo it with a darker ink to see would it look better, and it was fine. And that's the only time I had to do that in this whole video. This worked like a dream, moving 2 squares up every time and aligning the panel. Now this first row is probably the wonkiest of the lot that I did. As I went along, I realised that the best thing to do was not to be looking at both sides of the panel to try to get it straight, to just keep an eye on one side and keep that absolutely in the same place. Now I'm moving across to the left 2 squares before I start again. And this time I'll move down the MISTI 2 squares at a time. And this time I'm just watching the panel on the right hand side and making sure that it's in place. I moved it so that I could just barely see the grid line down the right hand side of the panel. And I found that this worked much better. I wasn't all over the place trying to keep it straight, just watching one guideline. And then when I got to the bottom, the fact that it was a hair above a grid line, because the 4 inches mustn't have been measured exactly right. I thought I did, but I must have been slightly out. But it didn't matter because the same thing was happening every time I came down to the baseline. And the narrowness of the gap the differential was so slight you wouldn't even notice. I'm trying to make sure I don't have the same inks together. I'm not using a pattern with the inks, I'm just doing them randomly, but making sure I don't have 2 the same beside each other, or above or below each other. And I decided that was finished now, that I'd make a panel of 5 lines and then another panel of 2 lines. Now I made sure that this piece of paper was exactly the same height as the other one, slightly above the 4-inch mark, so that I'd have that exact same gap between the top 2. And then I moved up 2 squares at a time, across to the left 2 squares, and this time I'm making sure that the right hand side again, that the right hand side is a dead straight line, and I'm moving it along the grid line. And it worked splendidly. And the second panel was ready, and I could see where I was going with this now. I trimmed the 2 panels down on my guillotine. I love this. See how narrow that strip of paper was? I used a My Favourite Things sentiment strip. And when I was taking it out of the package, it was in 3 bits. I had snipped it apart to use it in other ways. But if you do that with your sentiment strips, it's no problem putting them back together. So I stamp it with Versafine Onyx black ink, and I dance my fingers lightly across the top. I don't want to squish it. And I did that twice to get a crisp image. But Versafine Onyx black ink is a super ink. Now I'm showing you these because I bought these by mistake, the top one by mistake yesterday in my hobby shop. I meant to pick up Papermania bright white cards. I always use those bases. And instead I picked up these awful greyish ones. There can be a big difference in card bases. So I'll have to go back and get my Papermania. But for this card, I decided, right, well, if they're looking grey might be nice on this card front. So I cut out 3 Fancy Thanks, a memory box Poppystamps die, and stacked them together. And that slight greyishness was actually nice for the sentiment on this card. Now, I'll be using all of those bases in future for stacking behind sentiments and for things like that. I won't be using them. I don't like that grey at all. I like things to be bright white. Now I grounded my thanks on the second row of tiles, and all I needed now was some bling. And I went to my drawer where I keep these things, and I found these square gems. They're in that drawer for years. I remember when I bought them thinking, what card would you put square gems on? And now I think they're absolutely perfect for this one. This is actually the first card I made, the trial run, if you like, to see if the technique would work. And I was delighted with it, so I turned it into a congrats card using a silver matte card. And I matted the sentiment on it as well. That's a Sugar Pea Designs sentiment. I cut the balloons from blue card and I shaded them with Broken China Distress ink. 2 beautiful cards, I think, and all made with one tiny stamp. I do hope you'll give the technique a try. You might already have a square stamp in your stash, and the Waffle Flower set is very inexpensive if you want to take a look at that. Do come back for more cards in this series. I'll be putting them up soon on YouTube. Maybe you'd like to subscribe to my channel. I would love if you did that. There are some more videos on screen that you might like to watch. And if you'd give this video a thumbs up, it would be really good for me and for the success of my channel. YouTube might show it to more viewers. All the best for now. If you'd like to leave a comment, please do so. Take great care of yourself. Bye.